Everybody. Welcome to this College of Law Practice Management Futures Forum on navigating the current ESG landscape. My name is Chris Boyd. I'm a trustee of the College of Law Practice Management. I'm also the Chief Operating Officer at Wilson Sonsini, a large law firm based in Northern California with offices worldwide. And we serve technology, life sciences, renewable energy, and other growth companies really at all stages of development. We are very involved in ESG, both ourselves as an organization and also extensively advising our clients. And I'm very excited to kick off this panel today. We have some experts on ESG who are facing this and advising clients on it. So specifically, we have Amanda Urquiza and Jindrik Klub, who are leaders in ESG and sustainability. And they've invited two of our firm's clients, ESG Go and FinPublica, who are really making great progress in this space. So I'm going to hand it over to our experts, starting with Amanda. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Let me just make sure I'm off of mute. We are really excited to be here today. As Chris mentioned, I am Amanda Urquiza. I am a corporate and securities partner at Wilson Sonsini. My practice is focused on public company readiness, representation, and governance. I lead our ESG and sustainability advisory practice along with other partners at my firm, including Jindrik, who Chris introduced. His practice focuses on complex regulatory matters, including sustainability regulations and collaborations, as well as antitrust investigations, counseling, and compliance. He is our firm's leading expert on CSRD, which some of you may have already heard about. Jindrik and I are joined by founders of two firm clients, as Chris mentioned, ESG Go and FinPublica, organizations that are really at the cutting edge of the ESG landscape. I'll introduce Orly Glick first. She is the founder and CEO of ESG Go, a sustainability operating platform. ESG Go is a B2B enterprise software powered by AI, providing different tools for monitoring and optimizing ESG at enterprise companies and their suppliers. Orly has lived and worked in different countries and speaks several languages. Before founding ESG Go, she was a partner at Vintage, where she invested in technology startups and in VC funds and built and led the value-added services practice, bringing startup innovation to solve corporate challenges. And prior to that, she worked at McKinsey & Company and Merrill Lynch. We are also joined by Adam Wasserman, founder and executive director of FinPublica. FinPublica is a global nonprofit that empowers finance leaders to develop and achieve ESG goals. FinPublica provides a community for leaders to meet and share ideas, provides accessible and actionable content, and supports members in executing sustainability initiatives within their organizations and beyond. Adam is a graduate of Pomona College and Harvard Law School. He has more than 2 decades of legal, financial services, and nonprofit experience, including over 7 years as head of enforcement at the New York Stock Exchange and service as a litigation partner for a leading global law firm. In addition to founding FinPublica, Adam is also the managing member of August Way Law and Consulting, and the chair of Knology, a nonprofit focused on leveraging social science research to support the environment, culture, and financial inclusion. Today, we'll start with Jindrik and I covering a brief overview of the regulatory landscape, and then we'll jump into some discussion with Orly and Adam about their respective organizations and some of their thoughts on the current climate. So let me share my screen quickly. With me one moment. I'm not sure if anybody's able to see my screen.
Not yet, Amanda. At least I can't.
That work?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Excellent. So we'll keep this at a fairly high level, but just wanted to give you a bit of background on what we're seeing somewhat locally on a state level, on a federal level, and then outside of the US. So recently we saw 3 significant bills passed in California, SB 253, SB 261, and AB 1305. Wanted to quickly give you a bit of background on what these three bills cover so you get a sense of where this legislation sits in the overall landscape that we're going to be talking about today. These three bills really target different disclosures, and they are very broad and require companies that are doing business or operating in California to make certain disclosures. So it's quite broad, with California as one of the largest standalone economies in the world. Many companies, private and public companies, will be pulled into the scope of these bills and will need to make disclosures in the very near term, specifically with one of these, which has to be disclosed, requires disclosure in the beginning of 2024. So the first bill that I'll talk about is the Climate Corporate Accountability Act. This bill requires companies to disclose scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions if they are a private or public company that has an excess of $1 billion and does business in California. As a quick background on what these emissions capture, scope 1 emissions are direct emissions that businesses create. So, burning fuel in vehicles that are driven as part of your business operations. Scope 2, these are indirect emissions from energy that your company purchases. So electricity that you purchase to, and utilize in your offices or locations. And scope 3 is indirect and pretty broad. This includes any upstream or downstream emissions. So this picks up anything that your customers, vendors, suppliers generate. So, emissions created by purchased products would be in scope 3. So this is quite broad, and it will require companies that are pulled within scope to begin disclosing scope 1 and 2 emissions in 2026 for the year prior, and then scope 3 emissions in 2027 for the year prior. So there's a little bit of a tail here for companies, but it's coming fairly soon. Companies will also have to give a level of assurance for these emissions that they procure from a third party. The second category here of disclosure is under SB 261, which covers climate-related risk. And this will pick up companies that have revenues of 500 million or more. So not quite as high of a threshold as the emissions bill, but still a bit high, and thus some smaller companies won't get pulled within the scope of this bill. The disclosure required under this bill, and we don't have all of the details yet because the state will have implementing regulations by the end of next year that will provide some more granular detail on the disclosures that are required. But companies will need to disclose their financial risks and measures, as well as the acts they're taking to mitigate and adapt to these risks. So just to give you a sense of what that might look like for some of our clients at the firm, I have a client that has a large employee body in India. And over the last couple of years, the temperature has been increasing and an increasing number of days each year, the streets are too hot for employees to get to work. So for this company, they're beginning to think about the risks to their business associated with increased temperatures in the region where they have many employees, and also thinking about how to mitigate these risks on a go-forward basis. There are a lot of examples you might think about: companies that do manufacturing in areas that are increasingly prone to wildfires, these types of operational risks that might be tied to climate. And these disclosures will begin in 2026, just like the emissions disclosures. The third bill, and one that our clients are very focused on, is actually the voluntary carbon markets disclosures, because these will be required as of January 1, 2024. So a very, very quick implementation timeline for most of our clients that fall within scope. And this bill requires that companies that transact in the carbon markets, so that are buying, selling, and marketing offsets, or making claims about the climate-related claims such as net zero operations or carbon neutrality on a business or a product basis, they'll need to disclose a lot of granular information about their transacting in the market. So if they're selling offsets, they'll have to provide quite a bit of detail on the projects underlying those offsets. If they're buying offsets, they'll have to do the same. If they're making claims in California, which is a little bit ambiguous, how do you make a claim geographically? But if you are, you'll need to essentially show your work. So if you say you're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, what will you be doing to get there? How did you arrive at the conclusion that you could accomplish that? And do you have any, supporting data and third-party verification? So these are pretty broad bills, and they came after what most of us thought is the leading regulation in the United States, which is the SEC's proposed rule on climate disclosure, which I'll cover briefly. In March 2022, the SEC put out the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates companies that are transacting in our markets. And they came out with a regulation that covered various areas of company disclosure related to climate-related risks. So companies would need to disclose climate-related risks and the actual or likely material impacts of them on the company's business strategy and outlook. With respect to those risks, they need to provide background on their governance structure. So what are their board and management oversight processes? How do they manage risk internally with respect to these items? The proposed rule also required disclosure of scope 1 and 2 emissions and scope 3 if material to the company, with a requirement for certain companies to provide assurance with respect to those emissions. And then maybe one of the most controversial parts of the proposed rule, they also required certain financial statement disclosures. So companies would essentially be required to look line by line in their financial statements and ask if their climate-related risks and opportunities impact that line item more than 1%. And companies that did have targets, goals, or transition plans would also need to disclose those. Interestingly, this is one of the highest, if not the highest volume comment process that we've seen. So when the SEC proposes a rule, they take comments from various market actors and society at large. And they received a higher number of comments, I believe, with this proposal than they have ever received. And they actually, because of a technical glitch, reopened their comment period and received even more an even higher volume of comments. So it's taken them a while to sort through the comments they've received and then do an assessment of what the final rule should look like, particularly in light of the evolving political landscape, the evolving regulatory landscape. We're seeing developments, as you just saw, in California. We're seeing developments in Europe, and the SEC takes all of these developments and how they impact market participants in the United States into account. We just saw yesterday the new SEC rulemaking agenda, and it looks like we may see the final climate change disclosure rules in April of next year. So they've been pushed back a couple of times, and it looks like they're targeting April of next year. There are two other federal SEC rules that are not yet in a proposed or draft form that we're also anticipating, and just want to put them in your radar because companies will be beginning to think about these items next year. The first is human capital management disclosure. So a couple of years ago, the SEC required additional human capital management disclosure if material in companies' 10K filings or annual reports. They are going to augment those rules, and it is anticipated that there will be some quantitative disclosure that will be required. So perhaps workforce diversity or EEO-1 data. Those have been some guesses about what that might entail. So we anticipate seeing a new proposed rule on human capital management disclosure in April of the coming year. And we're also anticipating a corporate board diversity rule in October of next year. As many of you probably know, NASDAQ implemented a corporate board diversity rule, and many companies, the ones that are listed on NASDAQ and compliant, are disclosing the diversity of their boards already, or disclosing why they're not disclosing that. So we may see something comparable to that rule, but we'll see something. At least the SEC anticipates that we'll see something in October of next year. So that's a brief synopsis of what we're seeing on the US and California stages. And I will pass the torch to Yindrik, who will talk about CSRD.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Unlike the US landscape, which is still evolving and many sort of new regulations or disclosure requirements are still being defined, in Europe, the landscape has been settled by the CSRD, which is short for Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This directive entered into force in January this year, and it is probably the broadest ESG reporting scheme around the world. The CSRD broadens the existing EU regime for non-financial disclosure requirements, which are currently governed by the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, but that Non-Financial Reporting Directive applies only to large EU public companies. The CSRD, on the other hand, applies to both public and private companies doing business in the EU, and it aligns ESG reporting with traditional financial reporting in their home jurisdictions within the EU. The CSRD is very broad in scope and indeed broader than the US regulations that Amanda described. And to allow companies that so far have not been required to make non-financial disclosures to prepare, the obligations under the CSRD kick in over time, essentially based on the size of the company. You see up on the slide sort of the categories of companies and the timeline with respect to the CSRD's applications to them. So the first wave of companies that will have to start reporting under the CSRD are the companies that already report under the Non-Financial Disclosures Directive. These companies will have to start reporting in 2025 for their financial year of 24. And these companies are already familiar with non-financial reporting, but the scope of what they will have to do as from 2025 is significantly broader because of this. The second wave of companies is a group or is a category of companies that will involve subsidiaries of a number of US companies. So they're European subsidiaries, as long as those European subsidiaries qualify as a so-called large EU company. So what is a large EU company? There are employee number and turnover or balance sheet thresholds that apply in defining what is a large EU company. So a company that has more than 250 employees and a balance sheet of more than 20 million euros or net turnover of more than 40 million euros, and this is on a consolidated basis, so including all of their controlled subsidiaries. These are defined as a large EU company. These will have to start reporting in 2026 for their financial year of 2025. So there is some time to prepare for this second wave of companies having to report under the CSRD. The next category, or the third wave, are companies that are so-called small or medium-sized enterprises that are listed on EU-regulated markets. And these are fairly small entities that have a balance sheet of more than 350,000 or a net turnover of more than 700,000 euros and more than 10 employees. But again, they have to be listed on an EU-regulated market. They will have to start reporting in 2027 for their financial year of 2026. And finally, the last category of companies are so-called large non-EU companies with significant activities in the EU. And these could be US corporations that have more than 150 million turnover in the EU, and either a EU subsidiary that is a large EU company, as I defined that I explained just a minute ago, or a branch in the EU that has a net turnover of more than 40 million in the previous financial year. And these companies will have to start reporting in 2029 for the financial year of 2020. One thing to be aware of for this category of companies that they will have to report on a global basis with respect to all of their global activity under the CSRD. So this is going to be a significant undertaking for those companies. But again, the lead time is fairly long. Amanda, if you can move to the next slide, please. So, what will have to be included in the sustainability report? Essentially, it will cover many of the same kinds of information that Amanda already explained as being covered by the California rules or the contemplated SEC rules. And the information in the CSRD sustainability report is going to be on a wide range of environmental, social, and governance issues. There will have to be a description of the company's business model and strategy and their impact on sustainability and stakeholders. The company will have to identify the sustainability-linked risks and opportunities for the company, as well as the impact the company has on stakeholders and society. For example, the disclosure will have to include information about greenhouse gas emissions, reduction targets for 2030 and 2050 with a view of achieving net neutrality by 2050. There will have to be information about impacts on water pollution or risks arising from water pollution. And a category that is very new, I think, for companies, and still professionals are coming to terms what that will mean. Information about impacts on biodiversity, or the impact that reduction in biodiversity has on the company and the risk that it creates for its business. The sustainability report will also have to identify the company's sustainability-linked governance structures, the description of its sustainability policies, due diligence processes, and so on. To assist companies with the reporting, next slide, Amanda, please. To assist companies with the reporting under the CSRD, the EU adopted its own set of environmental or sustainability reporting standards, so-called ESRS, which contain 12 standards encompassing 82 disclosure requirements and over 1,100 KPIs. The disclosure will have to be accompanied by third-party assurance, which will start as a limited assurance at the beginning, but will gradually progress into reasonable assurance. And while the 1,100 KPIs sounds daunting, many of the KPIs under the ESRS are not quantitative and they can be met with narrative disclosures. Also, most of the disclosure requirements are subject to materiality assessment. However, here the CSRD is different in that it applies a so-called double materiality assessment, which includes both financial materiality, so the impact that factors have on the company's financial performance, but also, and this is a new sort of concept of materiality, the so-called impact materiality. In other words, the impact that the company has on environment, people, society, and many of the other elements mentioned in the slides. And importantly, and again, this is something of a specialty under the CSRD, the scope of reporting will have to cover the company's whole supply chain. So information will have to be also provided about the company's suppliers, the company's customers, both upwards and downwards the supply chain. So with this, I would probably maybe just mention one thing, and that is there is currently a proposal to amend some of the turnover thresholds that I talked about earlier. And if that proposal is adopted, then the thresholds for the large EU companies and some of the others will raise slightly. So that will reduce probably the number of companies that will have to report. And this is expected to be adopted by the EU in January of 2020. I think with this, I will probably close and then we can tackle any questions, Amanda, from the audience.
Excellent. So we're going to transition into some questions for our founder guests today and learn a little bit more about their organizations and how they intersect with this evolving regulatory landscape and all of the actors in it. I forgot to mention in the beginning that if you have any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat box and we will address them at the appropriate time, likely at the end of our discussion with our founders. But please do ask any questions you may have. We're eager to fill them. So let's dive right in. Let's talk first with Adam. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about FinPublica? What is it? What do you guys do?
Oh, thank you, Amanda. And you already gave such a great description. So in essence, we are a nonprofit platform, and we are working to inspire and empower both current and emerging finance leaders from around the world to achieve their own environmental, social, and governance goals. And we're really trying to do this through three planks. Number one, creating an engaged community. Two, providing expansive, but also really important, easily accessible content. And then third, by serving as a catalyst for action.
Excellent, Adam. And, you know, we are proud members of the community, but who are members of the FinPublica community?
Now, thank you, Ginger. It's a really wide spectrum. So we have 275 members since last December. They come from 20 different countries, and they come from across the financial services industry, defined really broadly. So we have folks from commercial banks, investment banks, hedge funds, PE, VCs, insurers, pensions, fintechs, green techs, as well as law firms, accounting firms, and consulting firms. Unlike some other ESG organizations that really focus on having either the corporate or the fund as members, we take a slightly different approach where we're focusing on the individual. And the reason we're doing that is because ultimately it's people who are passionate about these issues. It also allows people who pull the levers of change. And then finally, by focusing on individuals, you can bring in people from organizations who are interested in these issues, but the organization may not be far enough along to formally join this type of a group.
And what type of content do you have on FinPublica?
Well, we have a bunch of both live, in-person and virtual events. We've had panels, fireside chats, cocktails, salons, all with an effort to educate and also bring and leverage the community together. Some topics, and we've had the pleasure of hosting Yindrik in a number of these, include how to navigate between pro and anti-ESG regulatory actions. We've had sessions on public-private partnerships with the DOE. We've had discussions with the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance on the intersection between ESG and blockchain. And we're having an event just next week on how to make an impact with impact investing. But beyond what we're trying to do with the meetings and sessions and discussions, we're also trying to address an issue, which is how can we try to bring together as much ESG information under one roof and make it as accessible for everybody as possible. So if you take a brief look at our website, which hopefully I will be able to share, you see that in front of you, and you can see we have a whole number of different topics which you can delve into, whether it's what is ESG, what are the Sustainable Development Goals, what is ESG reporting, what does clean hydrogen mean, carbon capture, biodiversity. And then on the regulation side, One of the things we're trying to do is try to chronicle at least basic sense of what is the regulations around the world. And I think we're going to have to add the slides that you just did, if we can get your permission, to both the US and the EU. But we talk about jurisdictions, the US, EU, Asia, and we just recently added the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. We also try to put together a whole bunch of sample policies and procedures, guides, how-to guides, sample disclosures, so you can take a look at what other companies have done that is already publicly available. And then we also try to provide a number of different tools that are free and open source, so you can research companies, funds, indices, and other types of issues. So that's just a brief tour of the website and the content we try to provide.
That's a terrific resource, Adam. And you also mentioned that FinPublica aims to catalyze action. What does that mean specifically?
So ultimately, we're not looking for community and content just for community and content's sake. Rather, we want it to mean something and do something. And so what we're working to do is bring together our members and help them to come together and identify what are the issues that they want to tackle. And then how can they potentially collaborate in a way that respects all of the antitrust rules, which you are very familiar with, but do so in a way that they can help learn from each other, leverage each other's resources, and also leverage the resources from FinPublica. So you could have sample topics could include how do you report GHG for the first time, how do you diversify the supply chain, but we've actually launched our first set of initiatives with a number of our members from Africa, where we are looking to, number one, survey what are the regulatory landscape in the African continent, what is working, and some countries that are further along, and which of those recommendations can we make elsewhere. We're also taking a look at other potential initiatives, such as how to make obtaining credit easier for smallhold farmers, or how do you help small and medium enterprises integrate ESG into their businesses. And so a big focus of 2024 is going to be working with members from the ground up to identify what initiatives they want to tackle.
So exciting. If folks on this call are interested in learning more about FinPublica or have contacts that they think would be great for the FinPublica community or would be interested in joining FinPublica, what's the best way to do that?
You can just go to our website, which again is www.finpublica.org. And as you go to the website, you look at the top. If you want to contact us, you can contact us here. If you want membership, you can click on here. We try to make it as easily accessible for people as possible.
Fantastic. This is such a helpful resource, and I can say personally it's helpful to me in my practice. Should we transition over to introducing Orly Jindrak?
Absolutely. Orly, so what is ESG Go?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet everybody. So ESG Go is a software, a technology company. We're the AI sustainability platform for reporting and managing companies' ESG data and reporting. So we are a technology company, and what our software does is companies can collect their data using ESG Go. The data of ESG is everywhere in the organization. As Amanda and Jindrak mentioned, the CSRD, for example, is very complex, and there are many questions and many data and policies and different types of information that companies have to report and standardize. And so what our software does is companies can leverage it to input any type of data from any user in the organization in any format. And our engine will perform what we call data wrangling. We take the data and we standardize it by any framework. There are different frameworks. There's the CSRD, but there's also the SDGs, and companies sometimes report by GRI, by SASB. We call it the alphabet soup. There are many frameworks. Some companies actually that we know in Europe are reporting 25 different frameworks. Each framework has hundreds or sometimes thousands of questions. And for large companies that have different business units and different geographies, this is becoming what we call data spaghetti. So what we do is we collect the data, we standardize the data by any type of framework, and we help companies calculate their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. But beyond that, also generate an ESG report literally with one click.
Excellent. And just for clarification, what is the difference between, say, accounting, carbon accounting software and ESG software?
Yep, that's a great question. We get the question a lot. A carbon accounting software calculates scope 1, scope 2, and very few calculate scope 3. It's very complex. We do that and much more. The ESG, the environmental, social, and governance, only in the E, there is this scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, but there is much, much, much more than that. There's a lot of disclosures related to waste, to recycling, to water management. So we do all that, plus the S, plus the G, and that is one level above the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So we do that with all of the ESG and providing the data or standardizing the data by any framework so companies can do their carbon accounting plus their full ESG reporting with us.
Orly, and having said on some of these panels now, there seem to be many offerings in the market when it comes to ESG. What is unique about ESG Go?
Right. There's a proliferation of platforms, which is great and it's blessed. What is unique about our platform? 3 things. One is that we are pretty much probably the only deep tech and AI-based ESG platform. And why is that important? Only with AI, you can really predict if you are going to reach net zero. This is very difficult to do without artificial intelligence involved, the prediction part of it. This is related to, you mentioned earlier, the AB, I think it was 1305. Predictions is something that only AI can do. And the second thing is that we're actually the only platform that I know of in the world that provides a CSRD report with one click. So after you've input your data, our engine, thanks to the AI and thanks to the deep tech data engine that we've built, allows you to generate a draft report, not the final report, not the designed report, but the draft report with one click. So we're the only ones. And the third thing is that I'm actually very proud about this, is that we're the only, I think, the only technology company in the world that has 50% women, including in engineering. And I'm happy to be wrong. And I'd love to hear if there are more so we could celebrate diversity together.
Amazing. Orly, I've heard that you have a stealthy community of ESG executives. So what does that mean?
Yeah, we launched it, I think it was 6 months ago. The sustainability executive community is a growing community. And what we did is we started a stealthy community for leaders of sustainability in companies, where we bring speakers, ideas, we brainstorm, we mention tips and tricks that the heads of sustainability share. It's kind of a safe place to virtually meet each other, and also physically. We met in New York a few months ago to share experiences and best practices. We also have the community up on LinkedIn, where we share research about ESG KPIs for reporting. We call it the benchmarking insights, and we share data points from public information and information of what companies are doing in their ESG journey, and all of the public information and some insights that our AI generates, again, from public info. So yeah, basically a safe place for ESG executives to meet each other and share best practices.
Amazing. Sounds like a cool opportunity might exist for ESGCO and FinPublica in that area, as I'm hearing both of you speak. So we have a few questions for each of you, about your paths in the regulatory space, in the investing space, and what you're seeing, what you have seen, what you anticipate. Yendrik, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, and before we go there, both of you, Adam, you had impressive careers outside of ESG before you founded your respective organizations. And, can you share with us how you decided to focus on ESG and how your prior careers have informed your decision? Orly, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Sure. Wow. Yes, I feel like my whole career brought me to do ESG. I lived 10 years in Europe, where I saw how I saw sustainability from the European side. I lived 10 years in Orange County in California, and I worked as an asset manager. So I saw it from the investment point of view. I worked in banking, I worked in technology, and I worked in investment in private investments before. And in my last role as an investor in the private markets, I spoke to actually 153 corporates. And I think it was about 3 years ago, and they all mentioned the exact same things. We care about sustainability, we want to report sustainability, and we have a really big data problem. And then couple that with my great enthusiasm for diversity. I was speaking to my daughter and asked her, would you ever be a startup CEO? And she said no. And I asked her why. And she said, there's not enough role models and there's not enough diversity out there. And I decided to take that and so all of these things together, the combination of my background and enthusiasm about ESG and coupling the data part of it and my experience in technology together with changing the world a little bit.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Orly. Adam, what about you?
Oh, thanks. So, like you, I'm an attorney by training. So I spent most of my career at the law working with financial services firms. I had the unique experience of representing the board of directors of Lehman Brothers in all of the actions, investigations, litigations, and corporate governance issues arising out of the 2008 crisis. So that really got me very interested in the G in ESG, the governance. The same is true when I joined at the New York Stock Exchange and helped them rebuild their market regulation program, again, focused on governance. How can we make sure people who are trading are doing it in a way that is safe and fair? But while I was at the stock exchange, I also was blessed to participate in a 2-year fellowship with the Aspen Institute through their finance leadership program. And they brought together leaders from the financial services industry from around the world to talk about how can we leverage to create a better, or finance, how can we leverage finance to create a better society? And that really got me extremely focused on ESG generally. I also saw that there were a number of individuals who were interested in these issues, not just the chief sustainability officers, but everyone from the CEOs to the CFOs to the managing directors and whatnot, but basically didn't have the time to always get up to speed or have the community to begin learning and exploring these issues from. So once I passed the reins on to my deputy at the New York Stock Exchange, decided to form FinPublica to serve this need and really help those in the financial services industry, both the current and emerging leaders, became the sustainable leaders of the future.
Excellent. So I have an interesting question for you about the drivers of ESG. And this relates a little bit to Chris Boyd's question on, what governments are hoping to achieve by requiring disclosure. I think at Wilson, we've seen meaningful shifts in companies' ESG commitments, disclosures, driven by a number of different agents. We've seen investors push this, particularly our index, investors that we see looking, the BlackRocks of the world that are sort of in it for the long game and trying to use, levers inside the company to drive change for a sustainable future. We've seen it through regulation. We've seen it through, certain members of the board or management teams at our clients. What do you think are the most effective drivers of organizations' commitments to ESG? And then if you feel so inclined, what do you think is driving the interests of these actors in progressing ESG?
Happy to start. So obviously investors, this is one of the biggest drivers. Second is a little bit of FOMO. Companies, whenever they engage with us, they always ask for benchmarking. And they mention that they see that their peers and competitors are doing X, Y, or Z, and they would like to make sure that they're not staying behind. The third is customers. So we see a lot of our customers come to us because, it's a little bit of a network effect. They are the suppliers of a customer that reports ESG already, and they are required as a supplier to report to their customer. So it's been driven by large customers or conglomerates that are reporting ESG and start asking their suppliers. And the fourth that we constantly hear is the consumers and the Gen Zs. That's what they care about. It's a cultural thing. My kids are Gen Z, and that's what they talk about. They talk about diversity. They talk about not having straws from plastic in the house, and they're driving the conversation. They're driving buying consumer products. So these are the four main drivers that we hear.
No, thanks. I think all of those are extremely important. I think one of the most effective drivers is basically when you're able to align ESG issues with the business's underlying goals. I think one of the things that's really important to remember is that ESG is not just about doing good. It's not just about your values. It is also very intrinsically tied to what is a value proposition, and how do you reduce your company's risks, and how do you increase your company's returns. And ESG are really, it's less of a philosophy, it's more of the tools to basically begin to evaluate that, just like any other tool. And I think when you are beginning to see it that way, and you can see it driving your business's value and driving your business's success, and focusing on these issues in a way that helps push your company forward with its customers, with its employees, with its communities, with its investors, with its shareholders, that I think is really going to drive ESG action within organizations.
Excellent. I think Yindrik had a question on the current landscape that he was going to ask about.
Yes, that's an area where we do some of the work, because there is, especially in the United States, ESG is highly politicized, and we're seeing investigations by Congress, by committees, using antitrust sort of as an argument why some of the ESG collaborations should not be going ahead, the alliances and so on. So has this politicized atmosphere influenced the way FinPublica or
Right. Well, at FinPublica, I think the answer is both yes and no. I think ESG, for better or for worse, in some communities has transitioned from a 3-letter word to a 4-letter word. And we're trying to, I think, in a lot of different places, think about, well, is there another word that we can use that's a little bit easier for people to understand, whether it's sustainable finance or responsible investing? And I think a lot of folks are looking for that. It's also influenced our programming a little bit, such as putting together panels on how do you navigate between the competing political landscapes when it comes to ESG. But I think in another way, the answer is no, because what we're really trying to do is create a big tent for anybody who is interested in environmental, social, and governance issues to come in and explore what is it that they're most interested in and how can they push it forward inside their own organizations. But again, doing so in a way that is consistent with their underlying business goals. And I think when you think about it from that perspective, it's hard to say that we shouldn't all be utilizing whatever tools we can in order to make our businesses and investments better and stronger.
What about ESG Go, Orly?
So yeah, as Adam mentioned, both yes and no. Yes, when it started and maybe when it was at the peak, we were worried, and we actually at a certain point in time thought of changing our name. And then we really understood that it's not about the 3-letter word. It's about the significance of ESG. And we, our customers are from the software industry and from manufacturing industry, large companies and medium-sized companies that manufacture to consumers and manufacture to businesses. And what they tell us again is that their customers and their employees, that's what they care about. They care about the environment. They care about society. So that's where we see that this is not going to change. And actually, in our conversations with some of our large customers, if they are, for example, in the US, they still sell in Europe, and so they tell us, even if it's politicized in the US, we still sell in Europe, and there's still disclosures that we have to report. And even if they were not, we still want our consumers to know that we care about the environment and society. And so that's where we see that this is here to stay. What they say is that train has left the station. It's the new consumer, so it's here to stay.
Excellent. I know we at the firm have seen a lot of growth in the ESG ecosystem, in part by the drivers you all have noted today. An increasing millennial workforce that's anchored in the values that are espoused by many of the ESG rules, regulations, principles. We've seen, supplier interest. We've seen risks and opportunities related to the environment and long-term operations of businesses drive, major changes within companies. How have you guys seen, how have you seen the ESG ecosystem grow and evolve in the last 5 years? And where do you think we're going in sort of the next 5 years?
Wow, an amazing question. We really saw it going from nice to have to must have, where the conversations a few years back on with our customers and on the reporting side, on the corporate side, the conversations were more on the CSR or more like these are the volunteering activities we've done, and it was more general and more storytelling and more PR. Now it's really becoming fact-based. It's being measured. There are KPIs the companies follow, and there is this understanding, as exactly as you mentioned, the conversation is around risk, and as it was mentioned earlier too here, there is risk associated, and when corporates are reporting their investors, whether these are public investors or private investors, they need to know these risks. So the conversations are much more mature at the moment, and we're also seeing that in the company's personnel and in the groups of sustainability. So whereas maybe a few years back it was only the compliance officer or it was a legal or the HR. There was one person that was responsible for corporate reporting or CSR reporting, or just like one page on the website. Now, in most companies, there's a team of sustainability or a team of ESG, whether this is a vice president or EVP with a group or a manager, but there's a team, and there is a there's difference in maturity between companies. There are companies that are much more mature, companies that are less mature, but all of them, even startups now, have somebody assigned for sustainability and ESG.
Adam, any thoughts on what you've seen?
No, so I think reporting has always been a incredibly important and difficult issue, and companies like ESG Go, I think, are fantastic in order to try to make that a little bit easier. But I think, especially in like the recent years, I think there's been an additional focus, which is not only how do we report, but you have a lot of businesses and investors trying to think about, okay, how can we actually make money? How can we develop products that actually serve the energy transition and serve the sustainability goals? Because I think there is a huge amount of need for it. And you take what the consumer wants and what people want, and then you marry that with a number of the government incentives, such as the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA, the various subsidies and tax incentives for being a part of the clean energy transition. You have similar programs that are being done in Canada and Europe and elsewhere. And these programs that the governments are putting into place, I think, are creating amazing incentives for people to create new technologies, new solutions to try to help with the energy transition and help create new lines of businesses that will do well and do good.
Excellent. So we are nearing the end of the hour. I'll close with a question that is a bit of a general question and kind of hinges on a question we got from the audience. So you know, the ESG landscape and all of the evolving regulations, the alphabet soup of different frameworks you can voluntarily report under, the various ratings bodies that exist, the influence of investors, the influence of, you know, society or other stakeholders, all the governance aspects. You know, it's sometimes difficult to learn get a lay of the land and learn the landscape. So do you have any recommendations for folks on this call on how to up-level their ESG knowledge, or any? And we also have a question about, you know, are there opportunities for internships or other opportunities for folks who want to get engaged?
If I had to summarize it, I would say work with Wilson Sonsini on the disclosure side, understanding the regulation landscape. Work with Adam on learning about all the information around ESG best practices, and with ESG Go on the automatic framework standardization of their data. So I think the combination here is really interesting, and kind of this I think there's always going to be the need to work on the consulting side and advice and working with a community and network, and then on the data side, so combining all of these items.
Thank you. I certainly agree with all of that, and I apologize if I do a bit of a shameless plug here, but to the extent that you're trying to get just a basic level of understanding, I would certainly encourage you to visit our website, because that's what we're really trying to do. So you mentioned the reporting standards. So here, what we've tried to do is put together a discussion paper on all 12, but you can also go below and click on each one of these standards and learn a little bit about them. So to the extent that you have an hour and want to begin learning about ESG issues, feel free to peruse our website. And as far as internships, there are tons and tons available. If students go on Handshake and search ESG, they will find many, many opportunities, including opportunities at FinPublica. We've been blessed to work with about 14 interns over the past year from universities, law schools, graduate schools, and they have been absolutely amazing. And what really keeps inspiring me day to day are these young people and this next generation, because they are the future and they care, and they're going to do whatever they can to make this effort succeed.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Adam and Orly. I know we have a couple of polling questions that Debbie is going to share. And if you could kindly complete these, that would be very helpful. And yeah, if there's anything else that we did not cover, if you have any questions, I know I speak for everyone on this call. Yindrik, Orly, Adam, and I would be happy to speak to you and be helpful in any way that we can. Okay. Excellent.
Very much. Take care.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks
Sorry.
for having